Hello everyone, my name is Rosito Orquesta and once again welcome to Pantas Malaya. So this is another review on web designing, and the component that we will be talking about today is about CSS, or the Cascading Style Sheet. So if HTML is the backbone or the skeleton of the web design, then that skeleton should have a color, skin, a design, additional form to make it look pleasing to the eye. It will capture the the attention of the user, the customer, or the client. Now, in the previous video, I already have a simple example of CSS, um, where we try to create a design for the button, or the button element of HTML. But what we are going to have today is are these subtopics for the cascading style sheet as a sort of review on your skills in CSS. So we have 9. We have the CSS properties reference, the selectors reference, function reference, animatable, the oral, units, color, default values, and then the browser support. So the first thing we're going to have is the properties reference. A CSS properties reference is um, the properties of each elements or HTML elements. These are the attributes, CSS attributes we will use in manipulating the design of any HTML element. Say for example, we are going to have a specific background or color background to a button or to a text, or shall we say the position or the um, border. All of these functionalities or capabilities can be done using the properties reference. So with these are our file the last time. I will just modify this one. Okay, so here we have the body, shall we say, or we can add it in our head section. So for example, we have here the style for CSS. Inside this tag, we will add the CSS style, and shall we say we have a button. Okay, so if we're going to use the the reference properties reference, say for example, I will give this first an ID, so bit-in1, and then the style I will call that ID. Okay, and I will give that one a properties, say for example background color, then is a um, blue, and then say color This is a for the text as a white, and if we open that uh, file, okay, so this is our output, the button, the sample button. Now this color, background color blue, and the uh, or the font color white are applied using the properties reference, because this button has properties, the background, the text color, and also this button have a height and width. So if we're going to modify the height and width for this button as properties, so it has a properties of height and width, and that height and width by default is this wide, and this height. It will only depend on the length of the text and the height of the text. But if we want to modify that button, we're going to um, apply or call the height and width properties of that HTML element in or using the cascading style sheet or the CSS. So say for example here I will manually change the height into, shall we say, 200 px, and then I will modify the width to, say for example, uh, 400 px. Let's see what will happen to the bottom. As you can see, it became large. This is the 200 px, and this is the 300. No, yeah, this is the 200 px, the height, and 400 px width. Okay, so again, this width, height, color, background color are what we call the properties of the HTML element, and then it is being referenced inside the CSS script here, inside here. So those properties are default properties of the button or any element of HTML. Now we just access those properties inside the CSS and modify the value of each of the properties. Okay, so CSS selector reference. The selector reference is how you address or how you call any HTML element. Like for example, this one. Um, this class one, or say billion, and then another button in class is MBT or submit btn. Okay, and say btn2. We have this at 100 and this for 200 to minimize. Okay, so as you can see, we now have two buttons, sample button 1 and sample button 2, with different design, because only the button 1 is given a modified design using the CSS by calling its properties. And now to demonstrate how this selector reference work is, I would say, for example, instead of having this ID btn1, I will add, say for example, as you can see here that you have to, if it is a class, you have to add point and then add the next class name. But in this, we are going to use the ID, so let's try, um, let's say btn2, see if it will apply on both btn and btn2. None. Here, it is now being applied in both btn1 and btn2. So we just need to call all the class name that we want to modify for this. But we can still have another code or script, I mean, with separate value. Let's say, for example, this is just for btn1 and this is for just btn2. Let's say I will remove the background color here. Instead, I will add it here and in here. But I want this one to have the red value for background color. Let's try that one. The output, it will apply. Okay, so on see. So we can have a general script for um, different HTML element. We just need to call all the classes or reference or the selector. Okay, so these are the selectors, button 1 and 2, for a group properties. And then if we want separate or different differences in each of the output, we have to call it separately. So you can see here. Another thing is div p. See, so let's try to have a div here or a division. So this division will be named or given an ID div1. Inside this div are um, btn 0 without the class. So in the output, it first will look like this, and then we're going to modify that btn. Let's say annotative. Okay, so since it's ID, we're going to use sharp and then div1. I want this div to have a height of at least 300 px and then a width of about say 200 px. See what will happen. Okay, and then the background color yellow. Let's try yellow. Okay, so as you can see, sample button 0 is inside the div 0. Now I want to create a separate um, design for button 0 that is inside the div. So what could I do is we'll say div1 dot um or should we say, let's follow the example. um As you can see, this is our output. We have a div with color yellow here, background color yellow, and then as a one button with text sample button 0. Now in our code, I want to add another element inside the div, but instead of having a regular button or the common button, I will say create a button using the input type, submit, and then head value click me. So let's try to see what's the. So I have here two button. The other one is sample button with the following code. The button, and then the other one is an input type submit. Still a button. What I want to have here is to demonstrate a CSS selector that to select an element inside another HTML element. So see, for example, we have the div, and inside the div I want to modify all the button. See, all the button will have a all the button should have a background color of black, a height of at least a 50 px, and a width for about shall we say 150 px or maybe 200. Okay, let's try to see what will happen. Okay, and then now we need to change the color of text into white. As you can see, the first button is being modified. Now if I am going to add another button inside with a different ID, so for example 0-A or 0A with another sample button text, let's try to see what will happen. So it has a different ID but the same element button. So let's try to see if still this second button will have a dark background and or black background and white text, as well as the height and width are the same with the button with ID button 0. Okay, so as you can see, we have the same output because both of these elements inside this div are button. Now this is also a button but of a different type, since we specify that it is an input type submit button. Okay, so this is how you do that. So there are different types of addressing each of the element, HTML element. There are ways on how to select. We call this selector. Okay, here. Now after the CSS selector reference, we move to functions reference. Okay, now a function reference in CSS is a default function for creating or manipulating the design or the scheme of any HTML element with CSS. Now, for example, I'm going to use the max. Let's say max function. Okay, So using the button btn1 and btn2 for the output. Okay, but I want to move this one with to the next line. Alright, now with this button 1 I want to um, so again I am going to use the max function for the width of a button. Okay, so let's use this button 1 for this example. So I have here a width, but I want to use the max function, and on this max function I will have 50% and uh, 300 px. Okay, wait, so let's try that one. What will happen? So this is 50%, and if I'm going to change, or nope, uh, so that we can see, I'm going to have here 800, suppose. Oh, okay, so 50% and 800 px. So the output will be this one. This is the 50% or one. Then if I'm going to change that, okay, so I did resize the browser, and as you can see, it does not change into 50%. So supposedly, if this is the total width of our browser screen, the size of, or the width of the sample button one should be here, okay, in the center, because it is 50% width. But the function of this max is, say for example, if 50% width of the actual browser is greater than the 800 px, so it will apply the 50% maximum size of the button. But what will happen if when you resize the browser, and then the 50% of that browser width is less than the 800 px, then instead of using the 50% maximum width, it will automatically change into 800 px. So it's like the 800 px is the default maximum value when you resize the size or the width of your browser into smaller um, um, width. Okay, so perhaps you are going to create a text that will visible if the size of that button is 800 px. So when you resize the browser into a smaller window, then if it is set into 50% maximum width, the actual text will not be seen. The other half of the text will not be seen because or it might overflow to the width of the button, because 50%, when you are using percent, it will automatically adjust the actual size of the HTML element based on the size of the browser. Now, to avoid the overflow, you have to test the actual, or the default px or per pixel of the size of the button, of that button, in which it will not cause an overflow when you resize the maximum width of the browser. Okay, so this is the auto resize, and this will be your default value, or default, or the minimum pixel size or pixel width of your button. And then if you have a bigger screen, it will automatically adjust to the total 50% of that screen. So there are different types of functions in CSS, as you can see. For example, this RGB, you can define the color you want by creating say for example, if I am going to use RGB in this background color instead of writing blue, so RGB, so for example 255, then 50, 20, and then 80. So let's try to see what will happen to our bottom one with the following values. So it will produce a pink. As you can see, I am not using a hex, but the function RGB for background color. So it's a default, or a built-in function for the CSS to access different types of manipulation, to manipulate, to manage the actual output design of your HTML element. So after the function reference, we have the animatable reference. The animatable reference talks about the animation of each of the HTML elements. So you can animate an HTML element using a, CSS. So for that, I am going to show you an example. See, let's try to search from Google and then have the CSS animation samples. Okay, so say for example this one. Let's try to see if there are examples here for CSS animation. As you can see, okay, this is one example. The div is constantly expanding and contracting, expanding and then contracting. Another example here, maybe there's when you hover this one, it will create a background color of a lighter blue from left to right, and then when you move out, it will fade or pass to the right direction. And then here, as you can see, a spinner created by CSS. So this animation here are made by CSS. Let's try to see another example. Hello Bob, okay, users, and then there's one another. You click the submit, it will transform into a circle button with a check icon. And then another example here. Here, when you move your mouse inside, it will open the mail. Here, a coffee with bubbles. Okay, so another coffee. This one is save. A pack one. Okay, another loading. Air, a drawer. So all of these are um, created using or animated using the CSS. Okay, so so those examples are what we call the animatable. So browsers dependent on the it depends on the version of the browser that allows animations. Okay, and then if we say oral reference, the oral reference is the ability of your creating an ability of your web page to read a sentence or a paragraph. So oral style sheets are used to combination of speech synthesis and sound effects to make the user listen to information instead of reading information. This is very helpful to blind people, users learning to read, or to help users who have reading problems. So for home entertainment or in the car or by printed impaired communities. So it will add a voice, let's say from text. Your site will automatically play a sound reading the text in your web page, so that those blind people or people that has a problem with their eyes could still know the information by hearing the oral or the audio of your web page. Now, CSS Units talks about the length or expressing the length of your um, HTML element. Can you modify the HTML elements length like height and width as I have um, already created in our example like this one. So we have here the width, height. So it will use px or em, but most of the time we use px and um, percent instead of em. So this is still so much like with the HTML. Okay. The units that is used in resizing HTML element in HTML. So it's the same px, em, or percent. And then the color references. Still, it is the same with the HTML reference. We can have the word itself, the name itself, or we can use the um, hex code that equal to the name of the color that we want to apply, or the RGB as what I have shown you a while ago. An example of the RGB here. Yes, you can do that. And then another thing is the CSS default values. So this CSS default values only talks about um, these values. So all the link element in a browser has this default value. It has an underline for text decoration. By default, the cursor is will change to a hand pointed to the link. Okay, so all you have seen in HTML when you are creating a web page with just purely HTML and no CSS, uh, those skins or those styles are what we call the CSS default value, and then we can try to modify that value. We can add more style like background or whatever animations we need to apply to that HTML element using the CSS. But when you load it first, it has already a design, a default design. Okay, and these are some examples of this default design value of CSS. And then browser support talks about how different browsers and different versions uh, will allow the programmer to use such property of the HTML element or the CSS script. So for example, these are the scripts that possible to use in different uh, browser. Like for this one, property is all. As you can see, it's 79 on each, 27 on Firefox, 37 on Chrome, but only 9.1 for Safari and 24 for Opera. So you have to be careful on creating. Maybe you have seen tutorials about this, about that. They are telling you to use that property in your CSS design, but when you tried it, it doesn't work. Maybe it's the version of your Edge or your Firefox, Chrome, Safari, and Opera. Because there are certain versions that do not support some property values of the cascading style sheets. Okay, so and then that concludes the topics for the review on cascading style sheet or the CSS for today. I hope you have learned something from me and thank you so much.